The referendum is not just a moment of not being with Frank, of choosing not to be with him. It's not just about being British. It is the time where we celebrate rushing to the polls to say, we are Llanito. To us, that is the great moment.
The 50th anniversary of the 1967 referendum was marked with numerous community events last year. The Winds of Change production paid tribute to the occasion, focusing on real-life stories and characters whilst giving an insight into a culture and community. The White Light Company was behind the production. The group, which previously had brought us Llévame donde nací, focusing on the evacuation. Those behind the original script gave us their insight. I caught up with them at the venue prior to one of the performances.
The starting point was actually going to the archives. It was just, let's see what I can dig out. Let's see what is already there. Let's see if anything that's already in the archives triggers or paths that I would like to travel along. I like looking through what was going on around the world at the time to build a better picture of the time scale that we were looking at. From there, I then decide on what people I would like to meet up, obtaining life stories, meeting up with the people who lived through it. People in Gibraltar are just so generous with their stories. And they just came up with the most wonderful little anecdotes that I thought, oh, maybe I could squeeze that in.
We tend to break things up, and I'm looking, say, more for historical points of view, what the history of it is, and then Jackie's looking at a lot of personal stories.
One of the early scenes features the Queen's visit in 1954, an event which was a trigger for Spain's hostile approach towards Gibraltar.
I do not know why the British decided on this visit, but in doing so, they added insult to injury, since our Gaudijo had asked, as one leader to another, for Churchill not to send Her Majesty. Further, instead of keeping his promise about giving Gibraltar back to Spain for staying neutral during the Second World War, Churchill went back on his word and sent their Queen to stand on top of this rock, looking down upon the surrounding hills of our land. From there, the Queen could see the whole of the Campo de Gibraltar, covered with the beautiful flowers of spring, fragile petals which, like our women, are in need of protection, not abuse, to be defended and not sold off as cattle in the alleys and beds of La Línea. La Línea, the sister town del Beñón, which for more than 250 years Britain has exploited, keeping them in dire poverty. La Línea, whose men are paid far less than a Llanito. La Línea, where desperate men sell their women to satisfy the carnal pleasures of the soldiers and sailors of Her Majesty's forces. La Línea, where Gibraltar froze its garbage and lives off the misery. La Línea, where the Queen looked down and showed no compassion. So I call upon you, young men, to carry our banner and demonstrate our anger to the world. The eternal values of our Holy Catholic Church are at stake, and on this depends the destiny of Spain. On this path, we cannot waver. We must save the flowers of the Campo for our own young soldiers. ¡Libertad Español! ¡Viva Franco! ¡Arriba España!
Pues no estoy muy preocupada. Esto de que venga la reina está muy bien y muy bonito, pero ella después se va para su palacio de Buckingham y nosotros nos quedamos aquí sufriendo las consecuencias.
Es verdad.
Esto va a traer repercussion. Acuérdate lo que te digo, como Lourdes que me llamo.
Es verdad. Yo creo que tú tienes razón, ¿eh? El Franco lleva enfadado hace mucho tiempo.
Y mientras que Inglaterra está descolonizando estos países, pues Libertad se siente muy leal a ella y quiere permanecer British. Franco no para de recordarnos que Winston Churchill le dijo que le daría libertad a cambio de ser neutral durante la guerra. Claro que eso no está pasando. Y en vez de la reina ir a visitar los campos tan bonitos de España, pues viene a Libertad, que dice que está igual de podrida que la línea. Dice que nosotros tiramos la basura en la línea y que encima le pagamos menos dinero a los trabajadores por el mismo trabajo. Sí, y que todo el dinero de Libertad es del contrabando. Pero ¿esto cómo puede ser? Yo no entiendo nada, pero Franco tiene WhatsApp y dice que se nos ha acabado la vida buena esta que tenemos, a costa de los españoles, que ni nosotros ni los...
We were looking at the period and found that you could literally take political statements made in 2017 and swap them with politicians who made almost identical things in 1967. That the politics for us as Llanitos has not changed at all. It's the same literal pattern that happens. A unique triaphora of things that happens that go on. The English say something, the Spanish say something, and we try to get our point in between the two of them. And we're caught between whatever England says to us, we still don't seem to be getting too far ahead in the game, and they placate Spain no matter what goes on. That has been playing our entire political career.
Is this reflected in the play?
I think that the audience today will look at characters mouthing things. You have Tony Lothar saying things that are just identical to things.
Yes, and that's the one I was thinking about, because he has a line that says, I'm just hoping that this does not happen in the future, that my children and my grandchildren don't have to live through what we're living now. And that is echoed 50 years down the line, exactly the same things.
El gobierno español venga a apretar el torniquete, porque ya no se trata de cola en la frontera, registro diario de los coches, el follón con el Monscalpe. No, no, no. Ya es hacernos la vida imposible, la humillación total. Y en inglés me pide a mí, esté tranquilo y paciencia si esto cabrea hasta un salto, coño. Mira, si yo le tuviera que pedir al Señor una cosa solamente, le pediría que ni mis nietos ni mis bisnietos tuvieran que pasar por semejante cosa, porque esto no se lo cree nadie. La cosa no puede seguir así.
So obviously plenty of research, plenty of material, but then you've got the difficulty of condensing this and putting it into a script and coming up with a play and choosing your characters.
Yeah, it really is.
So how did that come? How did that go?
I mean, even now we were talking about how much if we had a draft of it again, we'd probably take things off.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got about an hour each side, and really, we should have maybe done 45 minutes each side. But what do you take off? Those were the decisions that we had to make.
And at times you say, okay, let it run a little longer because this is such a juicy story, it's just so interesting, or just a funny little thing that we want to say, because it can't all be just serious. You have to try and find the dynamics of more drama, sadness, humor. It's a historical piece. You have to find a way of tripping and tricking people into coming along with you along a very big journey, not just doing, as I said, a snooze fest of historical facts. You have to find a way of telling that tale with gusto and passion, and so it resonates for someone who lived through the period and someone who's just finding out about the period. Everyone is very familiar with the story of the referendum, but we wanted to try and find more texture and more depth to it. And the politics was not bringing it to us, because it's the same stuff. But what we did find, yet again independently, and then we worked together, tremendous stories and moments recorded in photographs or videos that were inspiring us. Since the politics was so flat and the same, we were then looking for, well, how do I get my imagination going? How do I get a groove on and tell a story about us that's worthwhile watching, that isn't just a snooze fest? And it was looking at pictures, and literally we looked at pictures and a story would come around. It might be a bit from a history book. The government in the past have done some good work with culture, and they paid for audio sites to be online, of recording people who lived through different ages. And I sat and listened to folks from the different periods and took a little bit of that story, a little bit of that story, and stitched it into a bit of history to try and give it something to go forward and you could really associate with as a person.
You're tuned to the General Overseas Service of the BBC.
Here's the news read by David Cook.
The rock stands firm, despite Spain's efforts to bring destructive pressure to bear on the tiny land that proudly flies the Union Jack. Spain has again stepped up its We Want Jib activity. In London, Sir Joshua and his deputy, Mr. Peter Isola, were heartened by the government's strong line against the Spaniards. British Foreign Secretary Michael Stewart made it plain that neither Britain nor Gibraltar would weaken under Spanish pressure. Spain, he said, was making a great mistake if it thought otherwise.
¿Lo qué? No puede ser, hijo de... ¿Cómo pueden hacerlo esto? Esto no se queda aquí.
¿Qué pasa?
¿Qué pasa? Haven't you heard? Otra vez lo mismo con libertad. Que me lleve para casa, Charlie.
Ay, no, mujer. Ya que estamos aquí los dos también.
Charlie, como no me lleve para casa, me voy andando.
Ay, pero no hay nada que tú puedes hacer ahora. Anda, ven aquí. Déjame darte un beso.
¡Está loco! Típico hombre. Solo pensé en una cosa. Que me lleve para casa. I have to see Angela Smith in House Reds Association. Just to know about this. Venga. Stop the car. Vámonos.
Ay, otra vez meten la pata a los puñeteros españoles.